The woman who laughed at him that night would spend the next morning wishing she had never seen his face. At exactly 8:17 p.m., Marcus Reed stepped through the revolving doors of the Grand Crescent Hotel, one of the most exclusive five-star properties in downtown Chicago. Crystal chandeliers glowed above polished marble floors. A piano player filled the lobby with soft music. Guests in tailored suits and designer dresses moved between the front desk and the private lounge. Marcus looked completely out of place. His dark coat was faded from years of wear. His shoes were clean, but visibly old. The small travel bag hanging from his shoulder had frayed edges and a broken zipper pull. Several guests glanced at him before quickly looking away. Others stared a little longer. Behind the front desk stood Rebecca Whitmore, the hotel's general manager. 42 years old, perfectly styled, and known for running the property with strict attention to appearances, she noticed Marcus immediately. Her smile disappeared. She watched him cross the lobby, her eyes scanning every detail of his clothing. Marcus approached the front desk with a calm expression. "Good evening," he said politely. "I'd like to check in." Rebecca didn't move. Instead, she folded her arms. "Do you have a reservation?" Her voice was cold enough to make two nearby employees glance over. Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Under Reed." Rebecca typed for a few seconds, then looked up again. Her eyes narrowed. Something about the reservation seemed to surprise her, but the feeling vanished as quickly as it came. "Are you sure you're at the right hotel?" she asked. A businessman standing nearby chuckled quietly. Marcus remained calm. "I believe I am." Rebecca forced a smile that wasn't really a smile. The Grand Crescent is a luxury property. Rooms here start at over $700 a night. A few guests overheard the comment and turned their attention toward the desk. Marcus simply nodded. "I'm aware." Rebecca leaned forward slightly. "And you're telling me you have a reservation?" More guests were watching now. Marcus noticed it. So did Rebecca. "That's correct," he said. "Under Reed." She checked the screen again. For a brief moment, uncertainty flashed across her face. Then it disappeared beneath confidence. "Interesting," she said, "because something doesn't seem right." One of the bellmen exchanged an uncomfortable glance with a coworker. Marcus kept his hands folded calmly in front of him. "What seems wrong?" Rebecca's eyes traveled from his shoes to his worn bag. "Let's just say this hotel attracts a very particular type of guest." The businessman laughed louder this time. A woman near the concierge desk smirked. Marcus remained silent. Rebecca seemed encouraged by the reaction. "Perhaps there's been some mistake," she continued. "Why don't you step aside while we sort this out?" The room grew quieter. Several people watched closely now. Marcus looked around the lobby for a moment before returning his gaze to Rebecca. Then he gave a small nod. "Of course." But as he stepped away from the desk, something unexpected happened. A young front desk employee standing several feet behind Rebecca suddenly looked at the reservation screen and froze. Her eyes widened. She looked from the monitor to Marcus, then back to the monitor again. And for the first time that night, someone inside the hotel began to wonder if Rebecca Whitmore had just made a very expensive mistake. The young employee's name was Emily Carter, 24 years old and only 6 months into her job at the Grand Crescent. She stared at the reservation screen as if it had suddenly stopped making sense. She looked at Marcus again. The worn coat, the old travel bag, the calm expression. Then she looked back at the screen. Rebecca noticed her hesitation immediately. "Is there a problem, Emily?" she asked sharply. Emily hesitated. "No, ma'am." Rebecca turned back toward Marcus. "Sir, I am going to need a little more time to verify some information." Marcus nodded politely. "Take all the time you need." Rebecca pointed toward a row of chairs near the far end of the lobby. They were not the comfortable leather seats reserved for premium guests. They were small waiting chairs positioned near a hallway leading to the conference rooms. "You can wait over there." Several guests watched as Marcus quietly picked up his bag and walked across the marble floor. Nobody offered him a smile. Nobody welcomed him. He sat down alone and placed the travel bag beside his feet. Rebecca felt satisfied. The situation seemed under control. But Emily could not stop staring at the reservation file. Something about it bothered her. The booking was legitimate. More than legitimate. The room assigned to Marcus was one of the most exclusive suites in the entire property. A suite rarely occupied even during peak season. Emily leaned closer to the monitor. There were notes attached to the reservation. Multiple notes. Most were restricted from her access level. That alone was unusual. Meanwhile, Marcus sat quietly in the corner. Guests continued checking in. Employees moved through the lobby. Conversations filled the air. Yet every few minutes someone glanced toward him. A wealthy couple passed by and whispered to each other. A businessman shook his head before entering an elevator. Marcus noticed none of it, or at least he pretended not to. 20 minutes passed. Rebecca intentionally helped 3 other guests before returning to his case. Every time she glanced across the lobby, she found him sitting exactly the same way. Calm, patient, unbothered. It irritated her more than she wanted to admit. Most people would have complained by now. Most people would have demanded answers. Marcus simply waited. Then something unexpected happened. An older guest approached the waiting area. He was in his 70s, dressed in an expensive navy suit. He slowed as he passed Marcus. For a second, he seemed ready to speak. His eyes narrowed with curiosity. Then he continued walking toward the elevators without saying a word. Marcus watched him disappear. A faint smile touched his face before vanishing again. Back at the front desk, Emily finally gathered enough courage to speak. "Rebecca, are you sure we should keep him waiting?" Rebecca barely looked up. "Absolutely. But the reservation." Rebecca cut her off immediately. "Emily, experience matters. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts." Emily fell silent. Yet something inside her told her Rebecca's instincts might be leading everyone in the wrong direction. And upstairs, far above the lobby, a private email notification had just arrived in the inbox of a board member staying in the hotel that night. Attached to the message was a short video recorded by a guest only minutes earlier. The subject line contained 6 words that would change everything before sunrise. The video had been recorded by a tourist named Megan Foster. She had been sitting near the piano when the entire interaction unfolded. At first, she thought it was simply an uncomfortable customer service moment. Then she noticed the expressions on people's faces. The laughter, the judgment, the way Marcus had been separated from everyone else despite having done nothing wrong. Without thinking much about it, she recorded 37 seconds of video and posted it to her social media account with a simple caption. "Something feels wrong about this." By 9:12 p.m., the clip had already gathered thousands of views. By 9:45, it was spreading far beyond Chicago. Most viewers focused on Rebecca's tone. Others noticed Marcus. Many commented on how calm he remained while being treated differently from every other guest. Back in the hotel lobby, none of that was visible yet. Rebecca continued her evening routine as if nothing unusual had happened. Marcus remained seated in the waiting area. Nearly an hour had passed. Finally, Rebecca walked over holding a folder. Several guests watched from nearby chairs. "Mr. Reed," she said, "unfortunately, we have encountered some issues verifying your reservation." Marcus looked up calmly. "I see. There may have been an error in the booking system." Marcus nodded. "That happens sometimes." Rebecca seemed disappointed by his lack of frustration. She had expected an argument. Instead, she found herself speaking to someone who appeared completely unshaken. "We will not be able to accommodate you tonight," she said. Emily, standing several feet away, looked horrified. She knew that was not true. The suite was available. The reservation was active. Yet Rebecca delivered the statement with total confidence. Marcus slowly stood and picked up his bag. "Thank you for your time," he said. Rebecca blinked. "That is all. That is all." For the first time all evening, uncertainty crossed her face. She had expected resistance, complaints, demands. Instead, Marcus simply adjusted the strap on his bag and started walking toward the exit. Halfway across the lobby, he stopped. Not dramatically, not loudly. He simply turned back toward Rebecca. Every conversation nearby seemed to pause. "You have a beautiful hotel," he said. Rebecca forced a polite smile. "Thank you." Marcus studied the lobby for a moment. The marble floors, the chandeliers, the employees moving between guests. Then he looked directly at her. "I hope tomorrow is a better day for everyone here." Rebecca frowned slightly. Before she could respond, Marcus walked through the revolving doors and disappeared into the Chicago night. The lobby slowly returned to normal. Guests resumed conversations. Employees returned to work. Rebecca convinced herself the situation was finished. But 30 floors above her, in a private penthouse suite reserved for members of the board, an elderly executive named Charles Bennett had just finished watching Megan Foster's video for the 3rd time. He immediately reached for his phone, and as the call connected, the first words out of his mouth were, "Tell every board member we have a problem. I think Mr. Reed was just turned away from his own hotel. While Rebecca Whitmore was finishing paperwork and preparing to end her shift, the video continued spreading across the internet at a pace nobody could have predicted. Thousands of comments turned into tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. People from across the country watched the same 37 seconds and asked the same question. Why had a paying guest been treated that way? Inside the Grand Crescent, however, the atmosphere remained strangely normal. The piano continued playing. Guests ordered drinks in the lounge. Employees completed their routines. Nobody realized that the hotel's reputation was quietly becoming the subject of a growing public conversation. Around 11:15 p.m., Emily Carter sat in the employee break room, scrolling through her phone. Her heart nearly stopped when she recognized the video on her screen. The view count had already passed 500,000. She clicked the comments. Hundreds of people were demanding answers. Some claimed they would never stay at the hotel again. Others wanted to know the identity of the man who had been turned away. Emily replayed the clip several times. The more she watched it, the worse she felt. Something about Marcus Reed's expression stayed with her. He had never argued, never raised his voice, never demanded special treatment. He had simply stood there while people made assumptions about him. Upstairs in the penthouse suite, Charles Bennett was no longer the only executive paying attention. 3 members of the board had joined a late-night conference call. The video played repeatedly on multiple screens. Nobody spoke for several seconds after it ended. Finally, one director broke the silence. Has anyone confirmed whether that was actually him? Another executive nodded slowly. Yes. The room fell silent again. And Rebecca does not know? Apparently not. Charles Bennett rubbed his forehead. Then we have a much bigger problem than a viral video. Back in her office, Rebecca received an email notification. The sender was corporate headquarters. The message was unusually brief. Mandatory executive review meeting. Attendance required. 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Rebecca frowned. Corporate reviews were usually scheduled weeks in advance, not overnight. She read the email twice before dismissing it. There had to be another explanation. Perhaps it was related to quarterly performance numbers. Perhaps it involved budget planning. Whatever the reason, she convinced herself it could not possibly involve the guest from earlier. Meanwhile, nearly 5 miles away, Marcus Reed sat alone near a hotel window in a different property overlooking the Chicago skyline. A cup of coffee rested beside him. His phone buzzed repeatedly with incoming calls and messages. He ignored most of them. Eventually, one call came through that he decided to answer. The voice on the other end sounded nervous. "Sir, everyone is asking what you want us to do." Marcus looked out across the city lights. His expression remained calm. "Nothing tonight," he said. "Tomorrow morning, we will simply tell the truth." As he ended the call, another message arrived. This one came from Charles Bennett. It contained only 6 words. "We will be ready by 8. And for the first time since leaving the Grand Crescent, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. At 6:10 the next morning, the Grand Crescent Hotel looked exactly as it always did. The marble floors gleamed. The chandeliers sparkled. Employees moved through the lobby carrying coffee cups and tablets as another busy day began. Yet beneath the polished surface, something felt different. Rebecca Whitmore sensed it the moment she walked through the front entrance. Conversations seemed to stop when she passed. Employees exchanged nervous glances. Even the morning shift supervisors appeared unusually quiet. Rebecca checked her phone again. The executive review meeting remained scheduled for 8 o'clock sharp. No explanation. No agenda. No details. She disliked surprises. By 7 a.m., the viral video had crossed 3 million views. News blogs were discussing it. Travel forums were sharing it. Customers were posting screenshots of the hotel's reviews. Emily Carter saw the numbers climbing and felt her stomach tighten. She wanted to say something. She wanted to warn Rebecca that the situation was becoming much larger than anyone inside the building realized. But every time she considered speaking up, she remembered the confidence Rebecca had shown the previous night. At 7:18, a black SUV pulled up outside the hotel. Then another. Then a third. Employees near the windows immediately noticed. Men and women in business attire stepped out carrying briefcases and laptops. One by one, they entered the lobby. Nobody checked in. Nobody approached the front desk. Instead, they headed directly toward the executive conference floor. Rebecca recognized several faces and immediately felt a chill. These were not regional managers. These were senior corporate leaders, people who rarely visited individual properties. A few minutes later, Charles Bennett entered through the revolving doors. The 78-year-old board member normally traveled with assistants and advance notice. Today he arrived alone. The moment employees recognized him, whispers spread through the lobby. Rebecca hurried forward. "Mr. Bennett, good morning." Charles offered a brief nod. "Good morning, Rebecca." His voice was polite but distant. "We are honored to have you here." "I imagine you are." The response felt strange. Before Rebecca could continue, Charles walked past her without another word. Emily watched the interaction and felt her anxiety grow. Something was definitely wrong. At 7:42, another vehicle arrived outside. This time several employees gathered discreetly near the windows. A tall man stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. Rebecca recognized him immediately. Jonathan Pierce, the company's chief legal officer. Her heartbeat quickened. Lawyers did not attend routine performance reviews. Not at this level. By 7:55, the conference floor was completely full. Executives, attorneys, board members, senior leadership, more high-ranking officials than the hotel had seen in years. Rebecca sat alone at one end of the conference table, trying to remain calm. Then her phone vibrated. A message appeared from an unknown number. She opened it. The message contained only one sentence. "The man you turned away last night will arrive at exactly 8 o'clock. Rebecca stared at the screen. Her mouth suddenly felt dry. And as the conference room clock moved toward the top of the hour, the elevator doors quietly opened. Every conversation in the conference room stopped the moment the elevator doors opened. Rebecca Whitmore felt her pulse pounding in her ears as everyone turned toward the hallway. Footsteps echoed across the polished floor. Slow, steady, unhurried. Then Marcus Reed appeared in the doorway. For a brief second, Rebecca thought she was looking at a different man. Gone was the worn coat from the night before. Gone was the travel bag with the frayed edges. Marcus wore a perfectly tailored navy suit. His shoes reflected the overhead lights. A silver watch rested beneath his sleeve. Yet it was not his appearance that changed the atmosphere. It was everyone else's reaction. The moment Charles Bennett saw him, the 78-year-old board member rose from his chair. Then another executive stood. Then another. Within seconds, every executive, attorney, director, and corporate officer in the room was on their feet. Rebecca remained seated, frozen in confusion. Charles Bennett stepped forward first. His voice carried across the silent room. "Good morning, Marcus." Marcus smiled politely. "Good morning, Charles." The board member extended his hand. They shook hands like old friends. Rebecca's stomach dropped. She looked around the room hoping someone would explain what was happening. Nobody did. Jonathan Pierce, the chief legal officer, pulled out a chair at the head of the conference table. Not for himself. For Marcus. The realization struck Rebecca like a wave of cold water. The seat was not simply important. It was the most important seat in the room. Marcus thanked him and sat down calmly. Every executive remained standing until he was seated. Only then did they sit as well. Rebecca could barely breathe. Emily Carter had been asked to assist with administrative materials that morning. She stood quietly near the back wall and watched the entire scene unfold. Her eyes widened as understanding finally clicked into place. The reservation, the restricted notes, the executive suite, the unusual reactions. Suddenly everything made sense. Marcus folded his hands on the table and looked around the room. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody checked a phone. Nobody even shifted in their seat. "Before we begin," Marcus said calmly, "I would like to thank everyone for joining on such short notice." His voice was relaxed, confident, familiar with leadership. Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. This was not the quiet guest she thought she had dismissed. This was someone every powerful person in the room clearly respected. Charles Bennett nodded. The board felt it was necessary. Marcus smiled slightly. "I agree." Jonathan Pierce then opened a folder and slid several documents across the table. Rebecca glanced at the top page. Her face instantly lost color. At the top of the document was a company ownership chart. And at the very top of that chart, above every executive name, above every board member, above every corporate officer, appeared one name in bold letters. Marcus Reed. Rebecca's hands began trembling. But what terrified her most was not the ownership chart. It was the fact that Marcus had not looked angry once since entering the room. And somehow that calmness felt far more dangerous than anger ever could have been. Rebecca Whitmore stared at the ownership chart as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less terrifying. They did not. Marcus Reed remained at the top, above everyone, above the board, above the executives, above the entire company. The room stayed silent for several long seconds. Finally, Marcus looked toward the large screen mounted on the conference room wall. "I believe everyone has already seen the video," he said calmly. Several executives nodded. Jonathan Pierce pressed a button on a remote. The screen came to life. There was the lobby. There was the front desk. There was Rebecca. And there was Marcus standing exactly where he had stood the night before. The 37-second clip played once. Then again. Nobody spoke. Rebecca felt every second stretch longer than the last. She watched herself questioning him. Watched herself directing him away from the front desk. Watched guests staring. Watched assumptions being made. The worst part was seeing Marcus remain calm through all of it. The video ended. Silence filled the room. Charles Bennett folded his hands. "This video has now been viewed more than 5 million times." Another executive added, "And the number is still rising." Rebecca swallowed hard. "I can explain." Nobody responded. Marcus simply looked at her. Not angrily. Not even disappointed. Just patiently. Somehow that made it harder. "Go ahead," he said. Rebecca sat up straighter. "I was trying to protect the hotel's image." The moment the words left her mouth, she knew they sounded wrong. Several executives exchanged glances. Marcus remained expressionless. "The hotel's image?" he asked. "Yes." Rebecca nodded quickly. "We serve luxury clients. I believe there might be an issue with the reservation." Emily Carter stood quietly near the wall. She could barely listen. She knew the reservation had never been the issue. Marcus leaned back slightly. "Did you verify the reservation?" Rebecca hesitated. "Not completely." "Did you have evidence that it was fraudulent?" "No." "Did I behave inappropriately?" "No." Each answer seemed smaller than the one before it. Marcus nodded slowly. "Then what exactly concerned you?" Rebecca opened her mouth, but no words came out. The question hung in the air. Everyone in the room knew the answer she could not say. Jonathan Pierce opened another folder. "There is something else the board should see." He projected several internal reports onto the screen. Employee complaints, guest feedback, customer surveys. Patterns began appearing. Small incidents, similar concerns, moments where people felt judged before receiving service. The room grew noticeably colder. Charles Bennett sighed. The video did not create the problem. It exposed it. Rebecca looked around desperately. No one was coming to her defense. No one was interrupting. No one was challenging the evidence. Then Marcus stood up and slowly walked toward the window overlooking the city. "Do you know why I started this company?" he asked quietly. Nobody answered. He looked down at the streets far below. "Because 30 years ago, I was turned away from a hotel even though I had a reservation." The room froze. Marcus turned back toward them. And what happened next would leave everyone in that room speechless. 30 years earlier, Marcus Reed had been 22 years old, carrying a single suitcase and a folder full of business plans that almost nobody believed in. He had arrived at a luxury hotel in Atlanta for an investor conference that could change his life. He still remembered the excitement, the hope, the belief that if he worked hard enough, people would eventually see his potential. Instead, he was treated like someone who did not belong. Not because of anything he said, not because of anything he did, simply because of how he looked when he walked through the door. Marcus slowly paced beside the conference room windows as every executive listened. "I had a reservation," he said. "I had confirmation documents. I had paid in advance." He paused. None of it mattered. Rebecca lowered her eyes. Marcus continued. "What mattered was that someone looked at me and decided they already knew who I was." The room remained completely silent. I spent that night sitting in my car wondering whether I should give up. Several executives exchanged glances. Most had never heard this story before. They knew Marcus as a successful entrepreneur, a respected owner, a visionary leader. Very few knew about the setbacks that came before the success. Marcus smiled faintly. "The next morning I attended the conference anyway." He looked toward Charles Bennett. "That is where I met Charles." The elderly board member nodded. "Best investment decision I ever made." A few nervous smiles appeared around the room. Marcus continued. "The company started with one small property, then 2, then 5. His eyes moved around the conference table. "And every decision we made was built around one promise." He stopped beside the screen displaying the viral video. No guest would ever feel the way I felt that night. The words landed heavily. Rebecca could feel every eye in the room shifting toward her. Jonathan Pierce opened another document. There is one more detail the board should know. A photograph appeared on the screen. It showed a much younger Marcus standing in front of the company's very first hotel. The image was dated 28 years earlier. Next to it appeared another photograph. The Grand Crescent Hotel during its grand opening ceremony. Then another. And another. A timeline stretched across the screen showing the entire history of the company. At the center of every milestone was Marcus Reed. Emily stared in amazement. She had known he owned the company. She had not realized he had personally built it from the ground up. Charles Bennett folded his hands. There is a reason his name appears first on every ownership document. Marcus looked toward Rebecca. His voice remained calm. The hotel was never the dream. Rebecca looked up slowly. Marcus continued. The dream was dignity. The room fell silent again. Then Jonathan Pierce received a message on his tablet. He read it, looked surprised, and immediately handed the device to Marcus. Marcus studied the screen for several seconds. Then he looked back at the room. It appears the video has just passed 10 million views. No one spoke. Marcus set the tablet down carefully. And what happened next would make this meeting impossible to keep private. Within 30 minutes, the story exploded beyond travel blogs and social media platforms. Major news outlets began requesting statements. Industry reporters started contacting corporate offices. Shareholders wanted answers. Customers wanted explanations. Employees throughout the company were sending messages to one another asking the same question. How could this have happened? Inside the conference room, the pressure continued building. Jonathan Pierce projected a live feed of public reactions onto the screen. Thousands of comments appeared every minute. Many people were not discussing the company. They were discussing Marcus himself. Viewers wanted to know who the calm man in the video was. They wanted to know why he never argued, why he never became angry, why he simply walked away. Rebecca watched the comments scroll across the screen. The public was seeing something she had failed to see. Dignity, patience, character. Every quality she should have recognized the night before. Charles Bennett looked toward Marcus. The communications team is asking whether we should release a statement immediately. Marcus considered the question for a moment. Not yet. Several executives appeared surprised. One director leaned forward. The story is growing every minute. Marcus nodded. I know. Then why wait? Marcus looked around the room. Because people deserve the truth, not damage control. The answer silenced everyone. Rebecca lowered her head. Each passing minute made the consequences feel larger. She had spent years believing she understood luxury hospitality. Yet the man who built the company defined it very differently. To him, luxury was not chandeliers or marble floors. It was respect. Jonathan Pierce received another message. His eyebrows rose. Marcus, you should probably see this. He handed over the tablet. Marcus reviewed the screen and smiled slightly. Interesting. Charles Bennett looked curious. What is it? Marcus turned the tablet around so everyone could see. The screen displayed an internal employee forum used by thousands of workers across the company. A new discussion had become the most viewed topic in the organization's history. Hundreds of employees were sharing stories about Marcus Reed. Not stories about a billionaire owner. Stories about a man who visited properties anonymously. A man who remembered employee names. A man who tipped housekeeping staff personally. A man who sat in hotel lobbies talking with guests for hours. Emily felt her eyes widen as she read the messages. One employee wrote that Marcus had once helped carry luggage during a staffing shortage. Another described him spending Thanksgiving serving meals at one of the company's smaller locations. The comments kept coming. Hundreds became thousands. Rebecca stared at the screen in disbelief. The person she judged from appearance alone was not simply respected because of his wealth. He was respected because of who he was. Marcus finally stood and walked back toward the conference table. Last night was never about me, he said quietly. Everyone listened. It was about whether we still believe in the values this company was built on. No one disagreed. Then the conference room door opened unexpectedly. An assistant entered carrying a folder marked urgent. She handed it directly to Charles Bennett. The board member opened it, read the first page, and slowly looked up. His expression changed immediately. Marcus, he said, there is something here you need to see before anyone else. And whatever was inside that folder instantly changed the direction of the entire meeting. Charles Bennett slowly slid the folder across the table toward Marcus Reed. Every person in the room watched his reaction. Marcus opened it and began reading. At first his expression did not change. Then he stopped on the second page. The room grew even quieter. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. Whatever was inside that folder clearly mattered. After several moments, Marcus closed it and looked toward Charles. Where did this come from? Charles adjusted his glasses. Internal audit found it this morning after reviewing additional records. Jonathan Pierce leaned forward. We expanded the review after the video went viral. Marcus nodded slowly. I see. Rebecca could not stand the silence any longer. What is it? She asked. Nobody answered immediately. Marcus finally looked in her direction. His voice remained calm. It appears last night was not the first time a guest was treated unfairly. Rebecca felt her heart sink. Jonathan pressed a button and a series of reports appeared on the screen. Guest complaints, employee observations, internal surveys. Most were small incidents. None had attracted public attention. But together they revealed a troubling pattern. Guests who felt dismissed before service. Visitors who believed assumptions had been made about them. Employees who reported concerns but never escalated them. Rebecca stared at the screen. Some reports were years old. Some were recent. A few came from the Grand Crescent itself. Emily Carter recognized one immediately. It had been submitted by a former employee who resigned 6 months earlier. Jonathan opened another document. What concerns the board is not any single incident. He paused. It is the culture these reports suggest. Several executives nodded. Marcus remained silent as the information continued appearing. Then Charles Bennett stood. There is another reason we called this meeting. He looked around the room. For 28 years, Marcus has visited company properties without advance notice. A murmur spread through the executives. Rebecca looked confused. Charles continued. Most employees never recognize him. That is intentional. Emily suddenly remembered something she had read on the employee forum earlier. Stories, rumors, anonymous visits. She felt a chill run down her spine. Charles pointed toward Marcus. Last night was not supposed to be special. It was simply another routine visit. The realization hit the room all at once. Marcus had not arrived to test anyone. He had not planned an investigation. He had not set a trap. Everything that happened occurred naturally. That fact somehow made it worse. Marcus stood and walked toward the large windows again. Chicago stretched across the horizon beneath a clear morning sky. A company can survive bad publicity, he said quietly. It can survive criticism. He turned back toward the room. What it cannot survive is forgetting why it exists. No one spoke. Rebecca felt smaller with every passing minute. Then Jonathan's tablet vibrated again. He checked the screen and looked shocked. Marcus. Marcus glanced over. What is it? Jonathan swallowed. The guest who recorded the video has just been interviewed live on national television. The room froze. Jonathan looked at the screen one more time. And she revealed something nobody outside this room was supposed to know yet. Jonathan Pierce connected the live television interview to the conference room screen. Within seconds, the face of Megan Foster appeared before everyone. She was sitting in a national news studio being interviewed about the viral video. Millions of viewers were watching. The host asked the question everyone wanted answered. What made you record that moment? Megan did not hesitate. Because it felt wrong. The room remained silent as she continued. I watched a man get treated differently before anyone even knew who he was. I kept waiting for someone to step in. Nobody did. Rebecca looked away from the screen. Every word seemed directed at her. Then the host asked another question. When did you realize the man in the video was important? Megan smiled slightly. I did not know who he was when I recorded it. Several executives exchanged glances. The host leaned forward. Then why did you post it? Megan's answer was simple. Because respect should not depend on someone's job title, bank account, or appearance. The conference room grew even quieter. Then came the moment Jonathan had warned everyone about. The host looked down at a note card. Our producers have confirmed that the man in the video is Marcus Reed, founder and principal owner of one of the largest luxury hospitality companies in America. The statement flashed across television screens nationwide. A photograph of Marcus appeared beside the video. News alerts immediately began appearing across phones throughout the room. Employees, investors, customers. Everyone was learning the truth at the same time. Megan. looked surprised by the announcement. I honestly did not know that, she admitted. But I do not think it changes anything. The host raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Megan looked directly into the camera. If he had not been the owner, people still should have treated him with respect. The room froze. Even Marcus seemed impressed by the answer. Charles Bennett slowly nodded. She understands the company's mission better than some of our managers. No one laughed. The comment landed heavily. On the screen, the interview ended. News anchors immediately began discussing Marcus's history, the growth of the company, and the viral video. Jonathan's tablet began vibrating continuously. Requests for interviews. Requests for statements. Requests from shareholders. Everything was accelerating. Then Emily Carter quietly raised her hand from the back of the room. Everyone turned toward her. She looked nervous but determined. May I say something? Marcus nodded. Of course. Emily took a breath. Last night, I saw the reservation file. Rebecca stiffened. Emily continued. I knew something was unusual. I should have spoken up. Marcus shook his head gently. You are not responsible for someone else's decisions. Emily swallowed hard. Maybe not. But I learned something. The room listened carefully. Sometimes staying silent helps the wrong thing continue. Marcus looked at her for several seconds. Then he smiled. That lesson is worth remembering. For the first time all morning, a small amount of tension left the room. But it disappeared again almost immediately when Jonathan received another message. He read it, looked toward Marcus, and frowned. The board has finished reviewing its recommendations. Charles Bennett slowly opened a sealed envelope on the table. His expression became serious. Marcus, he said quietly, the time has come to decide what happens next. Charles Bennett slowly removed a document from the envelope and placed it in front of Marcus Reed. Every executive watched closely. The board chairman cleared his throat before speaking. After reviewing the events of the last 24 hours, the public response, the internal reports, and the values upon which this company was founded, the board has reached a unanimous recommendation. Rebecca Whitmore sat motionless. Her hands were clasped tightly together. Marcus opened the document and read it carefully. The room remained silent. Finally, Charles continued. The board recommends immediate leadership changes at the Grand Crescent Hotel. Nobody seemed surprised. The recommendation had become unavoidable. Jonathan Pierce projected the official statement onto the screen. It outlined a complete review of management practices, mandatory retraining programs, new customer experience standards, and several organizational changes designed to reinforce the company's founding principles. Then came the final section. Rebecca read it twice. Her face went pale. The board was recommending her removal from her position as general manager. The room remained completely silent. No celebration. No applause. No satisfaction. Only quiet recognition of consequences. Rebecca slowly looked toward Marcus. For the first time all day, her confidence disappeared completely. I made a terrible mistake, she said softly. Nobody interrupted. I judged someone before I knew anything about them. Her voice trembled. And I damaged something much larger than my own career. Marcus listened without expression. Rebecca looked around the room. I spent years focusing on appearances, ratings, image, status. Somewhere along the way, I forgot the people standing in front of me. Several executives lowered their eyes. The lesson felt bigger than one person. Charles Bennett finally spoke. Leadership is not measured by how you treat important people. It is measured by how you treat everyone. The words hung in the room. Marcus closed the document and placed it gently on the table. Then he surprised everyone. I agree with the board's recommendations, he said. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly. But Marcus was not finished. However, I want one thing added. Charles looked curious. What would that be? Marcus glanced toward Emily Carter, standing quietly near the back wall. I want every manager in this company to hear this story. Several executives nodded immediately. Marcus continued. Not because of what happened to me. Because of what almost happened to our culture. The room grew still again. Jonathan quickly made notes. Charles smiled slightly. That can be arranged. Marcus stood and looked around the conference room. The people sitting before him controlled billions of dollars in assets and thousands of employees. Yet at that moment, the lesson was remarkably simple. Respect first. Always. Then a notification appeared on the large screen. The viral video had just passed 20 million views. But something else had happened. The most shared clip online was no longer the original incident. It was a quote from Megan Foster's interview. Respect should not depend on someone's job title, bank account, or appearance. Marcus read the words and smiled quietly. And in that moment, everyone in the room realized the story was no longer about a hotel, a video, or even a mistake. It had become something much bigger. 3 months later, the lobby of the Grand Crescent Hotel felt different. The marble floors were the same. The chandeliers still sparkled overhead. Guests still arrived from around the world. Yet something important had changed. Employees greeted every visitor with the same warmth regardless of clothing, status, or appearance. New training programs had been implemented across the entire company. Stories from the previous year were now used in leadership seminars. Not as a scandal, as a lesson. Marcus Reed stood near the front entrance one quiet afternoon, watching guests come and go. Nobody paid much attention to him, just the way he preferred. A family carrying suitcases entered through the revolving doors. A business traveler checked in at the front desk. An elderly couple asked for directions to a nearby restaurant. Every interaction was handled with patience and respect. Marcus smiled. That was the company he had always wanted to build. Emily Carter had been promoted several weeks earlier. She now helped oversee guest experience programs throughout the region. As she crossed the lobby carrying a tablet, she noticed Marcus standing by the windows. Mr. Reed. Marcus turned and smiled. Emily. She laughed softly. You know, people still talk about that day. Marcus nodded. I know. The video has over 30 million views now. Marcus looked outside toward the busy Chicago streets. The numbers never mattered much to me. Emily understood exactly what he meant. The video was not important because it became famous. It was important because it started conversations that needed to happen. Across the country, businesses had discussed it. Schools had discussed it. Families had discussed it. The lesson reached far beyond one hotel. Emily hesitated before asking a question she had wondered about for months. Do you ever wish it had never happened? Marcus thought for a moment. I wish people never felt judged before they were known. Then he smiled gently. But sometimes difficult moments reveal important truths. Emily nodded. She understood. Near the front desk, a young employee welcomed a guest wearing worn jeans and an old jacket. The employee smiled warmly, offered assistance, and treated him exactly like everyone else. Marcus noticed. So did Emily. Neither of them said a word. They did not need to. The moment spoke for itself. As the afternoon sunlight filled the lobby, Marcus began walking toward the exit. Emily called after him. Where are you headed next? Marcus adjusted his coat and smiled. Another hotel. Emily laughed. Unannounced. Always. He stepped through the revolving doors and disappeared into the crowd outside. The city moved around him. Cars passed. People hurried along the sidewalks. Nobody knew they had just walked past the founder of one of the largest hospitality companies in America. And that was perfectly fine with Marcus Reed. Because after all the headlines, all the interviews, all the attention, he still believed the same thing he believed 30 years earlier. A person's value is never determined by what they wear, what they own, or how powerful they appear. It is determined by how they treat others and how they choose to respond when others fail to treat them with respect. And that simple belief became the foundation of a company, the lesson of a viral story, and a reminder that dignity costs nothing to give but can change everything when it is received.